BBC, quite rightly, is under mounting pressure for failing to refer to Hamas, the group that launched that terrible attack on Israeli territory 10 years ago, as terrorists, because apparently they're just militants. Pfft.
It comes as Number 10 insisted that there is nothing listed in broadcast regulator Ofcom's rules that stops the broadcaster from doing so. Well, former Culture Secretary and talkTV presenter Nadine Dorries joins us now live. Tell us, Nadine, what's your verdict on the BBC reporting on this conflict in the Middle East?
So I'm one of 7 culture secretaries who have written to Tim Davie, Director General at the BBC, asking him to retract and to start doing what the BBC is supposed to have been doing all along, which is referring to Hamas as a terrorist organisation. It is beyond belief that the BBC still hold the line that what they are doing is abiding by the obligation that they have to be impartial. That is a nonsense. And also the BBC really can't just choose when it wants to be impartial and when it doesn't, which is what it seems to be doing at the moment.
Nadine, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you coming on. I hope the Royal Albert Hall was good last night. Just to think, I was talking about to Rod Liddle in the last hour about reading the room. I think there's so much anger at the BBC because they are our national broadcaster, whatever you want to say, and we pay for that facility. And whilst we all talk on this station every single day about a humanitarian crisis and nobody wants that, anybody with a brain cell, Nadine, will look at what happened 10 days ago. That is the most horrific of terrorist attacks, where children, I don't want to upset people, were burnt, people were murdered, women were raped, grandmothers were murdered, and it was put online. If that is not ISIS-like, if that is not terrorist-like, I don't know what is. So why the hell the government, the royal family, anybody and everybody has come out and said this was a terrorist attack? Tim Davie and his cronies, what do you think they get from being so obstinate, in my opinion?
So just pick up on a few points that you mentioned there. So it was on the scale of 9/11 and other major terrorist attacks. And I think there's a kind of a global recognition of this, which is why what the BBC is doing is so out there and quite bizarre, because there are very few organisations either across the world or in media. You look at any media outlet, they're referring to them as terrorist organisations. So the BBC are very much on their own in this at the moment. And you mentioned Tim Davie's name. I personally, I don't think it is Tim Davie. I think I think as the organisation has become absolutely infiltrated with those who are on the left of the left, and who I think he must be experiencing some very fierce opposition from within an organisation that he leads, and is finding himself in a position where he can't lead it because they are simply appear to be ignoring him. And although I have no evidence that Tim has kind of like stood up for this, but having worked with him when I was Secretary of State, I can't believe that this is something that Tim Davie is holding a line on. I think it's probably due to pressure within the organisation, and the consequences of the actions of what is happening now with the BBC will hugely impact the BBC. Last year, the figures of people buying the BBC licence fee literally fell off a cliff. I'm not going to quote the figure because I'll get it wrong, but I think it was close to 1 million people. So, or that may have been over the past 2 years, but it is dropping. If you look at the graph of the way it's going, it is literally going off a cliff.
Nadine, now, I just want to jump in there. Just to clarify, the BBC, they have used the word terrorist in their reporting. They just haven't specifically called Hamas a terrorist group. They would argue that they don't do that with anybody, that they're maintaining consistency on this. So the fact that they do have people on the channels calling Hamas terrorists, they have, suggested that they are a terrorist group. Is this not a waste of time for politicians in Parliament to be discussing whether or not the BBC are using a word when there is a literal war going on in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, your point is absolutely right. And I think the long-term consequences of the BBC are going to be that all right-minded people at the moment who are listening to this and listening to all other reporting on this situation are going to take the decision that they don't want to buy their BBC licence fee anymore. And I think they're shooting themselves in the foot by this action, But I also think, and that's, you know, maybe some people would say, well, you know, that's been a long time coming. But the fact that they simply refuse to refer to an organisation like Hamas, which, as Jeremy said, you know, I couldn't even get through my show on Friday. I was so emotionally impacted by some of what I'd get through the show. It is horrific on the most horrific scale. And there is no justification, either within the BBC or anywhere else, for refusing to call an organisation which murders babies in their cots, which gouges the eyes of babies out before it murders them. There is no justification for not referring to that organisation as a terrorist organisation, because terror is what they specialise in.
Completely
and
agree.
The BBC
Nads, can I just ask you one thing?
Step.
Sorry, Dad, can I just ask you one final thing? I know you're busy. We've got a manic show. Front of the Mail today. I know you've spoken to Alex Shaw. The headline is violent prisoners to be let out early. Hundreds of offenders to have sentences cut by 18 days under a Tory government. Your response to that this morning, Nadine Dorries?
So actually, I think Alex is a star of the government at the moment, because he approaches all problems. When you listen to him and you speak to Alex, he approaches all problems in the most pragmatic way. Why people aren't talking about Alex's, you know, future high-level leadership potential or cabinets, even hiring cabinet high office, I have no idea. What Alex has done is taken a very practical approach to what is a very serious problem at the moment. He's not doing politics. He's not saying, you know, well, you know, he has committed, I think it's 400 million to new prison places. But he's recognised that we have a problem at the moment. He's recognised that we have a situation which needs to be addressed to keep the people safe. And he's made it very clear that this is not about people who are a plague on our society. It's not about people who cause a social nuisance or high-level crimes where they're a threat to individuals. This is kind of like, you know, blue-collar stuff. And it's people who will be allowed out early and tagged. So it's not as though they're just allowed back out onto the streets. And therefore, he will be freeing up prison places to put those very people that we don't want on our streets, those people who are a nuisance to society, a plague upon society, those people who have committed serious crimes. And he wants the prison places for those individuals. And therefore, I think what he's taken is a very, very sensible approach. In his own words, you know, if you've committed a crime which is a serious crime or which is an antisocial crime or a plague on society, the only response to that is the clang of the prison gate, and that will still happen. But, you know, and I absolutely applaud his desire to free up prison places to get those people who will experience the clang of that prison gate inside, because they're the people we want in prison, not those who've been, you know, responsible for some kind of blue-collar crime.
Well, Nadine Dorries, thank you so much.
Can I ask a very quick question? Because you know you loved it. Same time next week, Nads?
No, Jeremy.
Yes, Nadine. Thank you so much.
That's how he got me into this job.
Thanks, Nadine Dorries.
Thank you so much. We'll